Hello, Crime Stoppers! Hey, second part of the video about alternatives and ConOps. This is the ConOps portion of the video, as the name would suggest. ConOps is a cool word that engineers like to use because we like to sound cool, but it means concept of operations. And what does concept of operations mean? It means what is happening to your payload. What's your payload doing? Or what's anything doing? You can have ConOps for walking across the street, you know. But what is happening? What is going on? The concept of operations. Operations is doing concept. What's it doing? So that's ConOps. You know, I'm going. This is like beating this dead horse, but I'm going for it. So again, we're on week 7 is what we're on. The week that cares, and the week 7 starts on page 65. ConOps starts on page 71. Einung if you're German. So, also very important with the ConOps, on the Inspire's website, on the downloads page, there's a box that says checklists, and it's bold, and there's a box. And there's the ConOps checklist. Go, stop the video, like pause, no, just pause the video, pause, and then go download this ConOps checklist. Also, while you're there, download this presentation that's on the downloads page also. It's called the ConOps video presentation. Download that under presentations. But the checklist, the ConOps checklist, this is going to be your best friend for ConOps, okay? Because what this does is it essentially asks you a bunch of questions. And these questions are meant to help you fill in the blanks of your ConOps, okay? And I'll talk more about it in a minute, but let's get rolling here. So, ConOps outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to define what ConOps is, talk about the checklist. We have an example for you that is just thoughtfully prepared for you guys. Basically, it's an example of ConOps explained using text and also using figures. It's a mission that PJ and I worked on several years ago. And then we're going to wrap it all up and put a bow on it. So, ConOps. So the book definition of ConOps is a description of how the system will be operated during the mission phases in order to meet the stakeholder expectations. What does all this mean, Matt? You might ask. Thank you for asking. Basically, it is, like I said before, what's going to happen? What does your payload have to do to accomplish your science objective? Stakeholder expectations. Stakeholder is not someone who's holding a stake like, you know, but a stakeholder is someone who who's interested in the mission. Like you have stakeholders like your customers. You've got the UH team as your customer. NASA is your customer. So your teacher is a stakeholder in this mission as well. So she wants you to do a good job, and that's very important. So stakeholders are people who have a dog in the fight, essentially, in this mission. So a ConOps is you're describing what's going to happen, what your payload's going to do to accomplish its science objective. It's describing what happens, basically. How does it work? How does it function? What does it do? In a ConOps, we have phases inside of a ConOps. A mission phase, or ConOps. Well, let's call it a mission phase. And a phase is essentially a length of time. I need something to throw. And a phase is a length of time over which not much changes for your payload. This might sound like a, okay, well duh. This might sound like one of those things, and it kind of is one of those things. But phases are important because they help you describe your ConOps to somebody else. Because what's going to happen at the end of the semester, you guys are going to stand in front of this board who's never met you before, never seen you before, never heard about your mission before, and you're going to have to explain it to them, okay? And you're going to explain what happens in your ConOps, and they're going to get lost. So that's when we have phases of the ConOps to help break it up. So you can say, okay, phase 1 of the ConOps is this. Phase 2 is this. Phase 3 is this. Now, during a phase, not much changes for the payload. Your payload could be flying around and, just like, it might be doing that, but that's still one phase. That's the crazy phase, okay? Your payload might be falling toward the surface of Europa, That's still a single phase because not much is changing. It's just accelerating toward the surface, right? So a ConOps for me throwing this eraser at the camera is, let's try it. That's a nice eraser. Holy cow. Anyway, so I'm going to throw this eraser at the camera. I'm going to miss and go right below it, hopefully. But okay, so that was my mission. That was my scientific objective, okay? So the ConOps was, let me get the eraser. Okay, excuse me. All right, okay. So there was an initial phase before anything happened, and I had the eraser in my hand ready to go. There was a deployment phase where I accelerated the eraser, right? And then before it left my fingers, that was a deployment phase. There was the glide phase where the eraser was going through the air just before it hit the, and then there was the impact phase where it hit the floor and bounced a couple times. So there were 4 phases in that little bitty simple 4 phases, right? I threw it like a weird, you know. So, so there's initial conditions, there's deployment, there was flying, what did I call it, flying? There was the flying phase, and then the hitting the ground phase, okay? So that simple thing had 4 phases, but it helps you to explain it, it helps you to break it up to somebody so you can explain what's going on to somebody. That's why phases are important. We talk about phases on page 72 in your book, and we ask you to list your phases. There's some questions on page 72 to help you with those phases as well. We'll talk more about phases in just a second. So the checklist, the ConOps checklist, as I said before, this will be your best friend, okay? It's in Microsoft Word format, so you can download it and just type into it, just answer the questions. You don't have to submit this to us. Your teachers might want this, but we don't care about it. Well, we don't want you to turn it in. We do care about it. But it's in Word, so you can answer the questions in there. Now, and before we go any further, this is a generic checklist. It's meant to work for everybody, for all the teams on this mission. So it won't be perfect for anybody by definition. So some of the questions might not apply to you. Some of the questions might be, you know, NA, not applicable. And some of the answers might just be, nope. Okay, so if the questions don't apply to you, don't freak out, because some of them will not apply to you. But some of the questions are meant basically to get the juices flowing, and so that you guys start thinking about this stuff. And here we've broken the checklist into phases. We have our initial conditions phase. Before anything happens, while your payload's just sitting there, what's going on? Basically, what vehicle is your payload on? Is it on the lander? Is it on the orbiter? What is that vehicle doing before you are deployed? Because that vehicle has some conditions that will impact what your payload does when it's deployed, okay? Capiche? Just like if you're driving down if I was driving down the highway in a convertible and I threw that same eraser out, it would be a lot different than me standing in this room throwing the eraser to you because of the initial conditions, right? All right, and so the second phase in the checklist we have is deployment. Deploying whatever your payload is. It has to be deployed. Something has to be deployed, right? Something can stay on board also, and you can still measure on board, but something has to be deployed, and that something also has to take some measurements, okay? So there's some questions about deployment as well. Measurements. Obviously measurements are very important. So that's a phase on here. Measurements are a phase. And how do you take your measurements? Where do you take your measurements? Do you take your measurements with cream and sugar? That was a coffee joke. What's the environment like where you take your measurements? Just a bunch of questions about measurements. The next phase in this checklist is sending data. This checklist might also help you with page 72. Wink. So sending the data, sending of the data phase. Remember, if I empty the dishwasher and my wife doesn't see it, it doesn't count, right? If you're in the woods, and if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Exactly the same thing, right? So if you go to Europa and you discover life, you actually land on Europa and you find little green people and they talk to you and tell you the secrets of the universe, and you don't get the data back, does it matter? No, the answer is no, because no one knows that you saw little green men on Europa, okay? Because you didn't get the data back. It's important to get the data back. Get the data back. I'm getting the data back. Anyway, so how you get the data back is important. Are you going to measure, send? Measure, send. This is measure, send data. Measure, send data. Are you doing that? Or are you going to measure, send, send? I don't care. It kind of depends on what you're doing, basically. But think about how you're going to measure and send the data, because it's important. It's part of your ConOps is measuring and sending. And either way can work. It just depends on what you're doing. some ways might be better in certain situations than others. I don't know what your mission is because this is a video and I'm, and so, but think about if you're going to measure, send, or measure, send. Think about that, okay? And then there's a catch-all category at the end called other, because we couldn't think of a word, we couldn't think of a title for it. But basically, are you going to hit the ground? And do you have to survive when you hit the ground? Are you going to, there's other stuff too, I'm sure. And we may have forgotten about some stuff. So don't be scared to add some stuff to this. But this checklist is purely meant to help you guys come up with your ConOps. It's not something that we require you to submit to us, but it's just to help you come up with your ConOps and to help you with page 72, wink, in the book. So, I'll talk about all this? Yeah, I'll talk about all this. So, an example of ConOps. I'm going to go through two examples and talk to you and kind of show you how ConOps should be explained, okay? So a few years ago, when was LSRM? Like 4 years ago, 5 years ago? Something like that. So when PJ and I worked on a mission where we were designing a probe to go to the moon, our moon, and the scientists wanted to measure heat flow on the moon. The heat flow basically, they wanted to measure temperature and heat flow. And so that basically is measuring surface temperature and then measuring temperature to a depth below. They would have also just accepted surface temperature as well. So concept one that we had for this mission was a lunar penetrator. The penetrator was released from an orbiter. It was going to fall downward and accelerate with lunar gravity, impact the surface of the ground, and then bury itself. Okay? It takes measurements of the heat flow along the length of the penetrator and at certain intervals, that's how it would accomplish the heat flow measurement. So concept number two that we had was the surface probe. It was just going to measure surface temperature, which the scientists would have accepted as well. So it was a spherical probe, like a ball, not like a ball, but it is a ball. That's what a sphere is. And it was released from an orbiter. It was going to fall toward the surface again, accelerating with gravity, hit the ground, but not bury itself. It's going to kind of hit and boom, 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 come to rest. After a while, skip and bounce and stuff like that, come to rest. And then it would measure surface temperature on the moon, okay? So those were two alternative designs, two alternative designs. You guys, the last video we talked about, we came up with alternatives, right? These were the same alternatives from that video, okay? So I just explained the ConOps for those alternatives, right? Now I'm going to switch and show you, notice the difference. This ConOps, a bunch of text, right? Okay? This ConOps, little text, some neat pictures though, right? So, same ConOps explained in a different way. Okay, so concept one is we have a orbiter going around the moon. This orbiter releases a probe, a penetrator that's shaped a lot like a missile basically. This penetrator accelerates toward the lunar surface, hits the surface, and then buries itself in the lunar surface. And then proceeds to take temperature measurements all along the length of the penetrator itself so it can measure heat flow. That's the penetrator, that's the lunar penetrator concept. Concept two is basically a lunar bowling ball, if you will. And we still have the same lunar orbiter. That's fixed because that's part of the mission. We release a sphere, a ball, essentially, that would impact the surface and then bounce and skid until it finally came to rest somewhere down the field, and it would measure surface temperature. Okay, so the difference between this example and this example, it's the same concepts I just explained. One was with a bunch of words, one had some pictures, okay? Now, I'm sure you weren't interested in either of them, but which one seemed more interesting to you? Typically, crap, I keep going the wrong way. Typically, text is boring. People see a slide full of text and they go, oh, text, and they get tired and they tune out. Now, pictures, not so much. Pictures, they like pictures. Engineers are very visual people. We're visual creatures. We're very pictorial. And we like pictures. When I buy a magazine, I like, pictures and, so I don't read much, I guess. But, engineers like pictures. We like to see how things are going to work and see how, and we don't like text that much. We're lazy. We don't like to read. So explaining ConOps in a picture form versus a text form also conveys more information. You're able to visualize it better if you didn't visualize it before. So ConOps should be explained in an image, okay? Now at this stage of the game with you guys, you guys are, we just started out with this project. You can hand draw some image and some images and you can put them in, you can scan them or take a picture of them with your phone and put it in the PowerPoint. However, this thing just took me just like 10 minutes to draw. I mean, I just did a little squiggly line, I drew a squiggly line across the whole thing and then put a dash line, put a little orbiter there, and then a little, I don't know, a little penetrator looking deal. That's just a circle, and then some dash lines. So this was not hard to draw, but it looks, I mean, I would use this, I've used stuff just like this in a professional presentation. So it's okay to use these kind of drawings, these cheesy PowerPoint drawings. Engineers love this junk, okay? So it's okay to use these things in presentations. I've seen some really good ConOps are explained using a storyboard technique. I don't know if you guys know what a storyboard is, but like a storyboard is a bunch of pictures. Like, and here's one picture that shows like what's a good storyboard? That shows Nemo looking for his dad, and then another storyboard shows Dory looking for Nemo, and another storyboard shows the sharks, and they're like, fish are friends, not food, and they smile, And so, so a storyboard is basically the phases of the mission, but they're explained in individual smaller pictures that someone can understand. It helps a lot. It helps to explain your mission. You'd be surprised. You will be surprised how much more effectively you can communicate your idea, your ConOps to someone when you draw a picture. We've seen some great pictures that were hand-drawn and scanned in, people that were artistically gifted. I am not one of these people. I draw cheesy PowerPoint stuff and I go with it, okay? So, but it's just, please draw a picture. This is a continuation. This is the same, I used the very same thing that I drew here, and I put a little gradient on it so I could show what heat flow was in this image. So, cheesy PowerPoint drawings, images show people what you're doing. And I showed, we're measuring temperature at every interval over the entire distance. So it shows people what you're doing. That's the most important thing. Communicating is the hardest thing about this. And pictures communicate a lot better than words do. So use pictures, draw, whatever, to explain your ConOps. Okay, I beat that dead horse. So, in conclusion, here's on page 73 in your book. Actually, we have some space for you to draw your ConOps. But in conclusion, use the ConOps checklist. So each of you, we should have two alternative designs, right? We have the group with the CE and the group with the PM. Each have an alternative design. You can draw ConOps for each of these designs so that you can help explain them to people. This is a good thing to say, like, okay, our concept 1 is this and draw a picture of it. Concept 2 is this and draw a picture of it to explain how the concept 1 and concept 2 work, how they operate. Okay? And then you can give the details, and then you can explain why you chose concept 1 over concept 2. You can show the pros and cons table. So, ConOps checklist, use the checklist. It'll be your best friend for this. It just asks a bunch of questions and it's meant to be helpful to you. I guarantee you it'll be helpful. There's some stuff on there that you probably haven't thought of. Divide your mission into phases where things don't change too much for the payload. Remember, but a phase can be, it can be accelerating toward the ground in a phase. That's the flying phase or accelerating phase, whatever you want to call it. So it can be a weird phase, but as long as not much changes for the payload's point of view, then it's okay. Explain what happens before, during, and after each phase. Even before you're deployed, what's going on before you're deployed. That's very important. Teams always forget about this. What is happening on the vehicle, on the orbiter or the lander, before you're deployed? What is this thing doing? It's extremely important. Pictures, pictures, pictures. Pictures, pictures. Pictures, 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 pictures. Pictures explain ConOps very well, much better than words do. Practice explaining your ConOps to somebody. It's difficult. I've done this ConOps several times and I still can't do it right. So it's difficult to explain ConOps to someone. So practice it with your drawing. Take it and present it to somebody who's never seen who's not into the class, never seen your idea before or anything like that. And just say, let me explain this to you and see if you understand it. See if you have any questions. And just tell them your idea, tell them your ConOps, and see if they get it. Show them the pictures and everything. And then lastly, did I mention pictures? So that's what, if you guys don't do pictures, then you're dead to me, okay? So just leave right now. Anyway, so that wraps up the ConOps presentation. Thanks, design group. So by the end of these two videos, by the end of alternatives and ConOps, you should have your two alternatives, your chief engineer group and your PM group, and you should have the table filled out with the components for each of these, for each of the group candidate designs. You should have ConOps for each group candidate design, and then you should have a table comparing concept 1 to concept 2, and just the pros and cons for those concepts. So you've got two really well explained and fleshed out ideas, at least two. You can have more. More is better. You can have 3 or 4. And so you have at least 2 ideas fleshed out, and you've explained the components and you've explained the ConOps for each of them, and you've explained which one you think is better and why you think it's better. Why is the most important thing, is the why with all this, okay? So we'll see you guys next week. I'm sure you're really oh yeah, I can't wait to see you. And if you have any questions, email us, email your UAH project managers, and we will talk to you later. Thanks.